Self-care. It's such a deep, layered word, and for me, it's really become the process of getting to know yourself, showing up for yourself over and over again. In creation of the Self-Care Creature podcast, I want to teach you, too, how to have a relationship with yourself. We're going to dive into the psychological and physiological unfoldings of adopting what I love to call a self-care lifestyle. This podcast is here to help you, the stressed out but spiritually minded individual who can feel that wild calling in your heart, who wants to develop self-care rituals to support your daily living, give you the confidence and know-how to live through your intuition and raise your self-worth. You deserve it. You are capable of this. And I want to help you understand how the hell to get there, what it actually means, and how do you actually live it. That's where my intention is with this podcast. The Self-Care Creature podcast, brought to you by me, your host, Courtney Klopp. Let's dive in. Hello and welcome back, creatures. I am so glad that you are here. It's been over a year since I've released an episode, and honestly, returning to this feels really good. I'm excited. There's a real reigniting of creative spark happening for me right now. This episode is one I've wanted to share for quite a long time. I pieced it together over time, starting back in June of last year, and I'll be honest, it's a vulnerable one for me. This is a part of my life I've kept pretty close to the chest, so sharing it more publicly on the podcast is kind of a big deal for me. Ultimately, it feels like a testament to the growth I've experienced specifically over this past year, and I'm really glad it's finally finding its way to you. If it resonates, I hope you'll pass it on to a friend, a family member, anyone who comes to mind as you listen. A review on your listening platform of choice also goes a long way. Think modern day word of mouth. And if anything comes up for you personally, questions, reflections, whatever, reach out directly to me or fill out the podcast form, which is linked in the show notes. I'm so happy that you're here. Let's get into it. Hello! I am so excited for this episode. It's something that has been brewing for me for quite some time, and I am actually sitting at the wellness sanctuary that I work at, the Bow Sanctuary, in their tea house overlooking the koi pond, and there's lotus flowers in the pond. There's a waterfall in the background. I'm not sure if you can hear that. And there may also be traffic going by. And if you hear bird noises, those are real bird noises. I'm not adding in fake bird noises to the recording. So here we are. And I always like to give a little update and just share about some things I've been moving through. And especially, I think I've been in a time of like, what are you consuming as far as TV goes, and sharing movies and things like this. And I've actually been in a season of not watching TV. I haven't watched TV in about 2 months, since it's mid-June right now at the time of this recording. And I stopped watching TV at the end of March, which is totally new for me because I do love TV, and I really especially love movies. So it's been kind of a new exploration. I've been in deep preparation for my ceremony season, and that's what part of that was: minimizing distractions, being on social media a heck of a lot less, which is always so liberating and makes me feel like I'm going to do this forever. And it always proves to ebb and flow. So I'm trying not to just jump in and be like, that's what I'm doing now. And then, of course, this comes with tending to my own deeper inner practices more, especially meditation, my rituals, my routines, and eating differently, really honing in on different types of food, which has taken me a really long time to get comfortable and be in a place where I can do that, because I, like many people, have had disordered eating patterns and habits in my life, especially being a functional nutritionist, having a background in that, and just going really far down that side of the wellness path. It's a big part of the wellness path. And so to be in a place where I have really been just, cleaning up my diet, moving my body, I guess essentially really tending to my self-care foundation, the pillars of the self-care foundation. And it's been really beautiful and slow, and I've officially opened up my ceremony season now by dropping into my own personal ceremonies with some of my teachers. This is the season of dropping into that type of space with my own teachers, my mentors, healers, honoring the land, giving service to the land, being in community a lot. And I'll touch a little bit more about what exactly are those ceremonies and what is that in this episode. But if you do want to know more, I share about that and have posted about that on my Patreon in a long form essay over the last couple years. There was one this year that I just posted, and then one last year. And Patreon really has become the place that I call, if a safe place on the internet exists, that is my safe space on the internet. And so shout out to my patrons. Thank you for your support there and for just being willing and interested in witnessing my journey of self-discovery and healing and journaling and writing and sharing a lot of these things. I have a few clients that are also patrons, and they've shared that there's a lot of great insight into who I am as a healing practitioner and an integrative lifestyle coach as far as that goes. So I'm glad that you're finding it helpful. I am laughing a little bit to myself because I just came, I haven't been watching TV or anything like this. And last night I watched TV for one of the first times in the last couple months. I will say a few weeks ago, my grandma and I watched TV together, and it was Wheel of Fortune and Jeopardy, but also Beastmaster. Yeah, they were doing a special on How to Train Your Dragon Beastmaster, and it was something my grandpa used to watch all the time, so that was really fun, actually, and silly to watch with my grandma. And it's also just interesting, like how drawn in I get by TV. And again, TV, similar to social media and phones, it's a screen. They stimulate our nervous system in a particular way. This is actually scientifically accurate, and even the reason why there's patents on some of this stuff. It's really, really fascinating to me. But yeah, stimulates the nervous system and draws you in. So I was just noticing how good it felt to watch TV with my grandma. And there's a lot of layers there, right? There's a lot of nostalgia there. But I started watching some silly reality TV show last night. I can't even remember the exact name of it, but it's on Netflix, and it's called Camp something, and it's basically a bunch of reality TV stars that come back to be in camp, and they have to do competitions, and it's like physical and mental type competitions to win money, and then you can vote each other out and all of this kind of stuff. And that's the kind of show that I love, because I love something that weaves in the physical and mental fortitude, but is also like super cliche in like relationships and just like the silly BS that goes on. So I was excited to see that as an option for my viewing pleasure, that I sat down with some of my favorite bars of chocolate, the HU chocolate bars, and a bowl of salty buttery popcorn, and that was just really sweet and delicious. And I will even say, I want to say that to my surprise, I thought that I wasn't going to feel very good today. I didn't feel particularly amazing after eating all of that, which is just to be expected because I haven't been eating anything like that for a while. But I bounced back in a way that I wasn't expecting this morning. I thought I'd be like groggy and tired this morning, but I wasn't. And so I think that also is just when we are able to click in over time, it takes a lot of time, to routines and rituals and our foundations that feel good for us, that we can make other choices that we know don't make us feel so good, and we're able to bounce back from it a lot quicker. And of course, this is very individual, bio-individual, not all of us will have that experience, but it's part of the learning process, and it's interesting and a little exciting for me to recognize that for myself. So I just wanted to share that. We're going to get into today's episode, this revealing the spiritual self. It's something that has been on my mind for at least a year, and it's really just kind of been percolating because I've had several moments with clients and even friends and even one of my teachers, which was actually a really surprising one for me, about that they don't realize just how much of a spiritual person I am. And in some regards, it's like so freaking obvious, right? That people are like, girl, we get it. We know. But in other aspects, people don't know. And so that's part of what this episode is about, is really revealing in clarity, what does that mean for me? And what are my practices? And how do I bring that back into my professional life? And the reasons why I have felt hesitant to share or intimidated to share. And the simplicity of it is wanting to be accessible, right? And in that regard, a little palatable to all people. But ultimately, I'm jumping ahead. I'm going to get into this more. But it's just that I have been so skeptical on this path towards spirituality that I want to remain essentially, yes, attainable, accessible to people that are also on that path, and not be so out there spiritually that people that are walking the path in new ways and with curiosity and with skepticism and even with cynicism, because that was me. That's what I did. I don't want to have become somebody that is so spiritual that those people that are looking and need people to explore with, safe practitioners to explore with, to see me and be like, ooh, like that's just not my vibe. Of course, there's going to be people that aren't my vibe, and that's different, but this is just about being in a relatable way. So it's been interesting to dissect that for myself over the last, definitely over a year. I've been dissecting that, and I feel like I'm in a really great place with it, which is what I'm always bringing to the podcast, is after I've done some work around things. So I think the one of the big realizations that first started knocking on my door around this subject was when my grief teacher sent me a follow-up message with my session notes from one of our sessions, one of our first sessions together. And she said, I confess that I'd had no idea about the depth of seeking you are engaged in. And that just has really stuck with me. And then I had a client at the beginning of the year that told me she was seeking out a shamanic practitioner, and of course I'm asking some follow-up questions and things like this, and then I'm like, well, did you know that those are studies that I've been undertaking for the last few years? And that this client had no idea that that was something that I was engaged in or was part of my background. And that happens a lot with my clients. Like, oh, did you know this is part of my practice, this is part of my studies, this is part of my background. And so again, I've just been sitting in that, like, okay, it's what do I need to do differently to be able to not be in this sort of hiding? Am I in some sort of hiding, is a first question, and then just getting to the layers. And of course, all of my personal spiritual practices weave directly into my capacity to offer professional support. And I just want that to come forth with more clarity. And the truth is, what I'm saying is that I don't talk much about it, and that I shy away from it, and that I don't want to be public about it because it feels and is extremely private and vulnerable, right, in some ways. But it's not just private, but it's also, I want to use the word sacred, and I also want to use the word traditional. It's very traditional, and some of these traditions are not my own. Definitely, I mean, they're not my own as a white person. as a white person, period. And so I think treading with caution and treading carefully and understanding how to go about these in good ways, knowing that you're never going to please everyone and it's not going to be a good way for everyone, no matter how fucking hard you try. That's just how it goes. And that has to be something that you walk with in a humble way. And so this is the kind of thing that I resist speaking about because I don't want it to be performative. That's the last thing I want it to be. And especially as someone who has shared a lot of their life online in the past, very transparently, and that I'm no longer interested in being that visible with every part of my life, I realize that I am interested, and it is important to me to be transparent about who I am and the paths that I am traversing. So this episode is me naming the things that have been quietly guiding me a lot in the background of what I do in the forefront, and even if they haven't been front facing. So I'll go into my personal definition around spirituality, about why I've been hesitant to share, what I see arising around spirituality and even psychedelic therapies, and why I feel called to speak on the sustainable ways to approach these types of paths, because the chances are that you are here because you also have these curiosities arising for you. So let's start with, what does spirituality mean to me? And the first time I ever really heard a definition of spirituality, it came from Brene Brown and her work. And so I will start there. Brene Brown says spirituality is recognizing and celebrating that we are all inextricably connected to each other by a power greater than all of us, and that our connection to that power and to one another is grounded in love and compassion. Practicing spirituality brings a sense of perspective, meaning, and purpose to our lives. And since I originally heard that term, it has evolved for me, particularly through an indigenous lens, into a knowing that we are all connected and interconnected, and not just to each other, but to all living beings. And you could even bring in the animist perspective that into what our modern day world would say, even inanimate objects. And I'm gonna squirrel brain here for a second. There's a teeny tiny baby bunny eating some grass on the path now in front of me, and it's the cutest fucking thing ever. So just take that in, take a breath, enjoy that visual for a moment. It's so freaking cute. So coming back to our interconnectedness, honoring all beings, all things even, and letting that honoring be to something greater than ourselves. This is what I have grown to call great spirit and great mystery. And it is a sense of connection that is rooted in love, belonging, and deep reverence and reciprocity. And spirituality isn't just about organized faith for me. I think that's a really big reason why I have been really hesitant to really want to be an outwardly spiritual person, because I believe that it is oftentimes synonymous with religion. But it can also be accessed through nature, creativity, ceremony, or even stillness. And it's not about subscribing to any sort of doctrine. I think what it really comes back to is, especially as a white person, is about remembering. And not just a white person, but in our modern day world where we have gotten so far away from nature, and natural practices. So this is also why I don't like the term woo or woo-woo. I think that it flattens something that is nuanced and sacred and real, and something that we just overall don't understand or have that knowledge of understanding and respect towards in a broader culture. And so it cheapens the depth of practice and reverence, and it often reflects a performance or a commodification of spiritual aesthetics without roots or responsibility. So back to spirituality feeling synonymous with religion, it's not the same thing. And honestly, I'm not sure that I believe our American culture does a great job of holding spirituality that isn't tied to religion. We want to label, we want to categorize and understand what box something fits into. And when something starts to feel like something else, spirituality and religion, like there's a lot of very similar fine line threads and even crossovers. It can just feel uncomfortable and yucky, especially if you're somebody that's come from a religious background or you've come from a skeptic and cynic. Oh my God, I can't find my words. Skeptic and cynic type background like I have. But spirituality, at least for me, it does not work this way. It doesn't work by the categorization, the labeling, and that's part of leaning into the mystery and becoming really curious that I've had to lean into. Because faith and religion are not the same thing. And there might have to be a lot of layers of untangling there. Just like sensuality and sexuality are not the same thing. They can overlap, they go hand in hand, but they are not the same thing. And you can have sensual experiences without sex. And you can have faith without religion. Faith is deeply personal. And hope, as I explored in a different episode, the hope is not an emotion episode, it can be a cognitive tool. And faith is more relational. It's an ongoing connection. And I do believe that it's something that is built out of practices and our own belief system. And so I used to believe that not being outwardly spiritual made me more accessible and palatable, as I was saying. And in some ways, it absolutely does, because I do work with many people who are in their own process of untangling their own past experiences and rediscovering and defining what spirituality is for them. But the truth is that I want to be accessible and aligned to help people define this for themselves. That's really what it is. My truth is in honoring, like I said, the great mystery. And I am a spiritual person, but I'm not a religious person. And I hold space in my work for all beliefs without judgment. And I've worked really hard to be able to hold that objective perspective. And I just love the way that I learn with my clients, especially occasionally when I do work with people that have religious backgrounds and beliefs, and that's where they're at, to really help each other understand more. Because my work is also in the both and. It's not the either or. And so it's learning how to walk with this meaning in your life and with your belief systems. So coming back to this definition with Brene Brown also emphasizes that spirituality is fundamental to resilience. And that's why I believe that it's time to start being more forward and outward about this aspect of my life, because of the resiliency that I see it has built and woven within the structure of my own being. And not just that, but more and more of my clients, I find, are feeling called to explore their own spirituality. And not just clients, but I'm seeing this in friends, and I'm seeing it in the new clients and the new people that are finding me and my work. And it makes sense. First of all, once we tend to our self-care foundation, we do arrive at a crossroads where we start wondering these deeper questions about life and meaning and beliefs and so on. But it's also, we have to be realistic about how we're living in a world that is very saturated. We're at this pinnacle point in history. I mean, not to say more than other times, but it's different than other times in its own way. Different and the same in, again, the both and. But we're in this modern time where grief and devastation and chaos is deeply saturated into our everyday. And it's necessary it is necessary, but I was first going to say it's natural and even necessary to want to root into something deeper and to figure out what that deeper spiritual foundation is for us to be able to feel clear, to be able to feel connected and steady amidst all of everything else going on in the world and in our lives. This is leading to more people having what are often referred to as spiritual awakenings, and a spiritual awakening in as grounded terms as I can possibly find is that when you start to sense that there's more to life than just the material, more than just surviving, but wanting to move into thriving and recognizing all of these synchronicities and that it can't just all be coincidence, right? And it's when your perspective expands and you begin to attune to purpose and connection and a bigger picture. And this often does arise during grief, change, loss, or other big life transitions. And they can also be very poignant and specific experiences that sometimes leave us a little bit disoriented. I'm thinking of, for me, what I would consider a moment that I had a quote spiritual awakening. It was just a really bizarre experience of, I was driving down the freeway. I was listening to the To Be Magnetic podcast, and this celebrity popular type shaman named Shaman Durek was on the podcast, and Lacey was interviewing him, and they were talking about moving energy and something about like ancestors, something like this, and just like moving it into your heart and speaking aloud. And I'm only paraphrasing to the highest form and seeing what I can remember. This happened back in, I think it was the summer of 2019, and I just was doing it while I was driving, and I was really surprised that I actually was overcome by this sensation in my body. I suddenly was crying, trying to be as safe as possible while I'm driving. I'm like, do I need to pull over? I didn't end up pulling over, but I probably should have, maybe in hindsight. But what was interesting, the coincidence that followed that is that I was driving to Portland, and I was going to meet a friend for a sauna session where she worked. And she had texted me that one of her coworkers was going to join us. And I was like, okay, cool. Well, it ended up being a coworker that I was in a shamanic circle with many months, I think maybe even a year prior. And that was at a time where I didn't know anything about journeying or some of these things that you do in shamanic type practices. I was just there and going along for the ride, these little tiny stepping stones in my life before they became anything else. So this person was there, my friend's coworker, and I told them what had happened on my drive, and they just said something very simple like, oh yeah, when it finds you, it's obvious. And I don't know, it was just so interesting to have that experience, that sensation in my body, and for that to be coincidentally be the person that was there to offer some feedback for me to land with. And then of course I had some more things that came up on my path, and I shared with my spiritual mentor about it, and they also confirmed yeah, this is what you're going through, and you need to work with some shamanic women and see some shamanic practitioners. And that's what led me to some of the teachers that I'm still working with today. And so anyway, that's just a little side note and share about what is a spiritual awakening. And because it does seem like some of that is a lot more alive today in the world, And as I said, that they can be really disorienting, but I also don't think that they have to be destabilizing. They can happen in a way that your nervous system can tolerate, a way that lets you grow, shift, and heal in a sustainable way. And the biggest thing, I think, is leaning into the safe people in your life and learning how to ask some questions, like what type of practitioner is going to support me best, and trying things out. And that's also part of the self-care path, is trying things out. And we are going to try things out that do not work for us, that do not resonate. And my goal is to help you navigate in a way that feels as safe as possible for you and is as safe as possible, knowing that no space is ever fully and completely safe, because we just don't know the shit that can come up at times. And that's hard. That's a really hard truth, but that is the truth. So let me share a little bit about my own practices. Very lightly. Like I said, if you want to dig deeper into these shares or understanding, come over to Patreon and give a little read. It's only $9 a month to be a safe space creature. And you can read some of those essays, and you can even cancel after you read them or whatever. But that's where I have these larger and more broad depth explanations. My spiritual path has come to include Lakota ceremonies, plant medicine like ayahuasca and psilocybin, ancestral studies, seasonal honoring, grief work, devotion to the unseen, and yes, all the spirit and unseen realms, and a deep commitment to listening. And again, this is all rooted in what I now call great spirit, great mystery, and in the foundational work of being present, honest, and willing to grow, which comes back to tending those foundations of our self-care lifestyle. And I turn back to what I call the foundations often. That is the learning to listen, the being in healthy conflict, becoming aware of my own patterns, my own biases and blind spots. And these are practices that, I talk often about the foundations, but these other ceremonies are practices that I don't advertise, but they are now deeply embedded into my daily life. This work isn't just seasonal anymore. And it's not just ceremonial. It has become my life, which is wild to reflect on and to realize for myself. And my teachers often say life is the ceremony. And it's wild for me to realize that my life has become the ceremony. I am just lightly reflecting on and thinking of all the times that, I did not grow up knowing what seasonal food was or living in a seasonal way. So there's been a passage of a lot of time in my life of learning how to live with the seasons, and then taking on retreat work where I was okay, summers are my self-care time, and that's when I get away and do this. And then getting invited into bigger commitments that I've taken on that have led me into deeper ceremonies, some of which I just mentioned. And I've always been oh yeah, it's just this is my season. And I even still say my ceremony season, but after ceremony season is integration, and it just weaves in and out all over again. And then we're right back to that ceremony season. And so, just fascinating to realize that my life has become the ceremony. And I'll say this again a couple times, but that is another way to define intentional living for me personally. And again, I'll say I don't want to share everything. And in that not wanting to share everything, I do want to share truthfully. And I also want to make sure that especially when the people around me are surprised by how integral this part of me has become, that there is a little bit more of an understanding there. I want to be in integrity. I want who I am behind the scenes to match what I offer in my work. And so I think it's important that there is some transparency there. I'm going to interject here for a moment with a little bit of a different thought, because it's about the day after that I originally recorded this episode, and I just sat down for coffee with a new friend, and they asked me some really pertinent and great questions that go so seamlessly into this episode, and I couldn't believe that I didn't actually address some of these in that episode. So that is why I want to bring that in. And one of the specific questions that this friend asked me is, how do I identify spiritually? Literally the topic of this podcast, right? I am just still chuckling to myself that I didn't include that in this, but here we are now. So they went on to ask, do I identify as a witch? Do I identify as a Buddhist, or things like this? And where do I lean? And it's led me into a really great discussion around how I do or don't identify, and ultimately how I don't identify in any particular way. And the processes and the things that I probably have the most resonance with in my life come back to these land practices, to interconnectedness and honoring the great unknown, which of course for me has been largely influenced and informed through indigenous lineages that I feel really grateful and honored to have found myself invited to be a part of. It's just all in all, that is it. It is honoring the great mystery and the great unknown in our life. And what a practice that has really personally served me quite well, especially during this time in the world where there is so much unknown. And I know some religions argue, I remember at a different time I had a conversation with a student that was talking about, I can't even remember what specific branch of Christianity he belonged to. Ignore the beeping in the background. Sorry, I couldn't turn that off. But he was saying, people used to pray to the unknown, and this so-and-so came in and was like, you don't have to be praying to the unknown. You can pray to God, and here and so forth. And I just had to retort and really share that that's not the point. That's not the point. The point is the unknown, and how disrespectful, in my opinion, to think that you have the answer for somebody else's belief system. And I think that's what it really comes down to for me, is that when I look through a religious perspective, I think that all of these different religions are essentially different languages for saying the same thing. We are all human beings. This is my take and my belief structure, is that we are all human beings that have arisen out of the universe itself. Alan Watts says, as a wave rises out of the ocean, you're still part of the ocean. And we're experiencing life. And then we attach meaning to that. And there are so many different things, and I don't think there's just one right answer. And part of it, for me, is being open to the curiosity and being open to explore. And so, sure, there are many paths that I do identify with, and I used to, some of you might remember, I called myself a witch, an eclectic witch at some point, but it really just doesn't resonate so deeply anymore. It doesn't feel like that is my language to be using. It's not a strong resonance for me when I use that. And so in this conversation with my new friend over coffee, it's this conversation kind of led into queer spirituality. And I love this term, and thinking of it so outside of anything that has to do with how you identify attraction or sexuality wise. Queer as in completely outside of the norm. Queer as in not following any sort of binary or any sort of box or structure. It's going beyond that. And that is the point for me. Finding what has heart and meaning, with curiosity and continuously to come back to our interconnectedness and come back to our human experience and honoring the earth practices is really what makes sense to me. And it's very important for me to remain open that that's not going to be everybody's perspective and it's not going to be everybody's path. And I don't just think, I know that I would like to see in the world more of this understanding for different beliefs. And can there be space? What if there is space for us to have these different belief structures and also coexist? And of course, that's a tale as old as time, a question as old as time. Is it possible? And I would like to think yes. I would definitely like to think yes. And it is a challenge, especially when we zoom out to the macro and the mass scale and collective viewpoint, because managing that amidst a lot of people is clearly the challenge. And I do think that we are intelligent enough for that as human beings. I would like to give us that credit, and I really hope that we can grow into that as a species, hopefully sooner than later. So let's move into where all my transitions go. So catching my own mannerisms. I'm moving into where my caution stems from. And there is just so much happening in the spiritual and wellness worlds. And I'm not here to critique it all, maybe a little bit, because there's always red flags, there's always eyebrow raises, and there's always opinions. We are human beings after all. But what I ultimately want to do is invite you into discernment and learning how to discern. Because New Age spirituality is on the rise, and it's on the rise exactly from all of the other things that we have already talked about, with the destabilization that we're experiencing in our cultures globally in some ways, and especially here in the United States. And New Age spirituality is not inherently bad. There are fun and beautiful elements, but here are my concerns. I often see bypassing of reality or emotion in favor of constant positivity, that there is often that cultural appropriation that lacks context and reverence and responsibility. And then we get into people being untrained, unqualified, or unsafe in the way that they hold space. There are so many stories, unfortunately, alive out there of the practitioners, I'm just going to say it, white people especially, and very much white men, if I may. And it's an ego-driven thing, right? You have an experience and you're like, oh, wow, this is incredible. I did it once. Now I'm going to go out and teach everybody else how to do it. And I have even fallen into that in some ways. I remember having to catch myself. I remember when I first learned from another teacher that she's with her studies of whatever she's learning for at least a year before she turns it around and takes it out to her students or to the public. And so, yeah, that's a piece of it. And then my last concern that I have at least listed here is that there's practices shared without lineage, not acknowledgement or preparation, which kind of goes back to that cultural appropriation. But it's interesting because we're both living in a time where it's very pertinent to be able to weave your own path, to forge your own path and journey, and that's so important. But we're also living in a time where everything comes from something else at this point. And so I think it's really important to acknowledge, where did you hear that? Where did that come from? The lineage and the preparation that it took to bring this out. I want to work with people and be surrounded by healers and practitioners and mentors who are doing that honoring. I think that's something that you can look out for. And ultimately, in my spiritual practice, it's really important for me to keep it grounded and to keeping it coming back to the human experience, about real connection and real community right here. That doesn't mean that I don't believe in being able to journey, going to different realms, meeting different beings, like whatever. Like there's so much to spirituality, and I'm here for it. And of course I believe in it and I have experienced it. And in the same vein, there are things that I haven't experienced and or things that I don't necessarily believe. I will side note here, there's not a lot that I don't believe, because I kind of believe that anything is possible. And that can be really scary, and that was one of the shakeups I had in the midst of all of the misinformation and trying to find my footing and things going around during the pandemic times. I was like, okay, if anything is fucking possible and there's some wild shit going on right now, I need to figure out what is true for me. And this is what I come back to. It's the human experience. It's weaving it, my own resiliency through myself, and being able to be there with and for other people, to be there in my community. And ultimately, that is the reason that I have found through and through, from all of the people that I have worked with over now 13 years in this profession, that is what everyone says. I'm doing this not just for myself, but so that I can be there with and for the beings that I care most about. So let's go into discernment around medicine and modalities. It's not just about qualifications. It's also about trauma-informed space holding. And trauma-informed has become such a buzzword. So what is that? Are you trauma-informed just because you have experienced trauma? I don't think so. I think actually having a couple of trainings, and if you can't access trainings, there's a lot of information online. And again, we have to discern, like, who are you learning this from? Where did they learn it? What are the resources? And so just making sure that you're going about it in a good way. But the things that come up for me that I'm wondering is this, when I say trauma-informed, is there concern and acknowledgement around how to create as much of a safe container as possible? Is there adequate follow-up? Is the workshop, the experience, whatever this is, if we're talking about like medicine ceremonies and spirituality and psychedelic therapies and things like this, is the work being centered around individuals' well-being rather than a blanket of cookie cutter copy and paste type things? Is it clear that this practitioner cares more about profit than the individual? Little things like this. And I can't say enough, if you in your own gut just have some sort of ick, get out of there. Just get out of there. You can figure it out later. I guarantee that you can, and you will find somebody else that doesn't make you feel that way. You should be allowed to ask your questions, and you should be held in your curiosities and your concerns. So there can be a dangerous narrative right now that plant medicine or psychedelic therapies is this magic pill. We live in a culture of convenience, and we want the magic pill, right? We want to be able to find what will fix us. And there is the narrative around, if you just do psychedelics in some regard, do the ayahuasca, take the psilocybin, that you're going to have this profound experience that just rewires your brain in ways that nothing else can. And it's a both and. I'll say yes, and also, healing doesn't work in the flip of a magic switch. Healing doesn't work like that. I don't think anything real actually works like that. And when you haven't tended to your foundation, there are things that are going to happen and things that are going to come up. And I've had friends and colleagues even that have not participated in what I am calling medicine ceremonies, plant medicine ceremonies, that are like, I'm curious to do these things, but like, I've got a lot of shit I got a lot of shit. And so we talk about what kind of foundations are they tending, to be able to drop into that space, because there are two specific things that come up for me that I think could happen if you are not tending to your foundation. And so one is that you may have an interesting experience. You may walk away with a few golden nuggets, but little lasting change. You're just going to go right back into your routines. There might be some rewiring happening underneath the surface, but ultimately, if you're not weaving in some of these foundational things, you just paid a lot of money for something that you're really not going to get a lot of ROI on, return on investment in. And the second biggest concern is that you will be cracked open in a way that disorients your system and leaves you struggling to return to your everyday life. And that is very real, and that definitely happens. And I've seen it happen even with people who have been tending to their foundations. And so it can be really tricky. I think when we dive into this work, something is that you have to build a lot. I think part of the foundation tending is building self-trust with yourself, and also coming to a place where you can really hold yourself through the hard shit. I think that's a big piece of it, because shit is going to get hard. It's going to get hard. So ultimately, that can all boil down to just saying integration fucking matters. Not me being an integration coach, but I mean, it does. Integration matters so much. And foundation tending before the deep dive is my biggest push in all of this. Before diving into any sort of deep or otherworldly place, you need to build something within yourself. And this includes some of what I was saying are those foundations at the beginning of this episode. It includes nervous system regulation. It includes emotional literacy, emotional intelligence, being in tune with your emotions. It means being embodied in your own boundaries, understanding your boundaries, having a relationship with yourself, your internal narratives. Do you have the self-awareness that you can understand that an old story is coming up and not attached to it, and you can see your shame when it arises and invite it in a healthy way and work through it? Things like this. You need to be able to have that groundedness, because yes, I can't say it enough, this work can be very disorienting. And when you have the tools and the practices, in my experience, this is how it becomes more manageable. Okay, now this is the next most challenging thing. You're listening to this, you're interested in diving into some sort of plant medicine stuff, and I'm telling you, foundation tend. I'm going to gently hold your hand when I say this, and I really hope that you can hear me. This is one of the most challenging things, I think, to hear. Foundation tending takes time. How much time, Courtney? Squeezing your hand a little bit here. Honestly, it could take years. It takes years. And that might be really hard to hear, especially if you're eager. And I just want to say, trust me a little bit. Think about this. This is for your long-term well-being. This is for your mental fortitude. And this is for your soul's unfolding. And all of that matters more than just diving in and having this experience you're curious about. And I think that if you take a moment to really check in with yourself, you'll know if you're ready. Throughout this episode, I've built this tiny little checklist for you to be able to check in and ultimately come back to trusting yourself. And sometimes I've said in several episodes across this podcast that I'm a deep diver. I'm going to dive in with both feet. I might even start to drown a little bit. And that's what I was born into this life to do. And I don't recommend that for everybody. It's not the way for everybody. And so really taking in deep discernment for yourself of what you need and how you need to go about these practices for yourself. So I'll just share quickly here that ayahuasca specifically circled me for about 8 years before I sat with it. I was starting to come into some curiosities around spirituality. One of my coworkers told me that she was really involved with ayahuasca. It was coming up in a few of my friend groups. And so I remember asking her, like, oh, is this something like that I could do? And I don't even remember specifically her response. I think she was also a very deeply discerning person, and it wasn't like a no, but it wasn't a definitive like, yeah, of course. She might have even reflected it back to me. That's something that you need to sit with yourself. But my first ceremony that I did was in June of 2024. And there had been a few opportunities that came up for me along that path. And I did a little bit of my own research, around what is ayahuasca, what is the tradition, how do people go about it, because there's so many different layers, and it's gained a lot of popularity. I remember even reading about it in a few magazine articles of these reporters and journalists that had went down to Peru and had these experiences. And it just eventually I said yes after I had been working with a teacher of mine, Casetta Ramoni, for about 6 years, 5 years, I guess, if it was last year that I started these ceremonies. And she has been working with the medicine herself for over about 20 years. Her and her husband worked with the medicine in their own personal journeys with their teacher for 4 years. They go down and work with their teacher every single year for a few months and continue to do their own work, and they've been pouring medicine in this way for 14 years. So when I tell you these things take time, it's not just the foundation tending, but you've got to I don't want you to just jump in with a practitioner that started last year or started yesterday. I want to back up saying that, because we all start somewhere, but when you start with a practitioner that's started, quote, last year, they better have had a few years under their own belt of leading up to this practice. The friends that I have that are beginning to hold medicine space and step into that in their own way have been studying this for years. And so that's something else to just be aware of. And again, the both and. If I turn towards psilocybin, magic mushrooms, that's something that I did use recreationally for years. It was first introduced to me when I was 18 years old, and it was introduced to me as something that you need to be really intentional with. And I did psilocybin several times in recreational ways throughout my 20s, and I absolutely attribute it to altering my life view. It changed the way that I was able to look at life. I think it really helped me recalibrate. I got to a point where I would do mushrooms with one of my best friends every year, and it just helped to realign and reset things, and it felt safe and sacred in its own way. But eventually, when I started working with one of my spiritual mentors, he told me that he wanted me to stop doing that, especially on my own or in a recreational way, because I was starting to dive into deeper realms in my spiritual practices and shamanic studies where other things are opening up to me, and he didn't want me to venture into a space that I couldn't come back from. And specifically, that disorientation or psychosis. These are very real things that can happen to people when you are working with psychedelic medicines, as I would call them. And so I don't say that to scare you. I say that just to remind you of the path that we're traversing, and the importance of being careful and being discerning and coming back to your own intuition and knowledge, and also asking the right questions. After all of this time of journeying into my own practices, I did return to psilocybin and have had one assisted psilocybin therapy session with one of my teachers, and that was also really incredible. At some point, I do plan to share about that experience on my Patreon. I'm slowly getting through all the things I want to share, but just again, it's all in hindsight. It's after a lot of integration. It's been 2 years since I had that experience. And that's what I'm really trying to navigate in my practices and as a professional, not attaching to the things that come up right away. Of course, there's a place for wanting to share what's fresh and remember the process of what's fresh, but there's also so much more in hindsight, and sometimes we have to really let these flowers bloom. There's things that you really truly just can't see, and I think that's what's feels a little scary to me when I see these influencers and people online sharing about some of these profound experiences that they've had with this language they've learned to speak in as a professional, not a professional, an expert. They have learned how to speak as an expert, and they're talking about the profound experiences they've had. And what I don't hear or see is, where is the integration? Where is the curiosity? Where is the openness for more things to unfold or things to change? It's all very like, this is what it is. And that's just not a way I operate. I just can't operate within such... there's a word that's escaping me right now. I'm going to go with adamant conviction. Adamant conviction is, I just can't speak in that way and through these experiences in that way. Wrapping up this episode now, what I really want to say is that I guess this is the small reveal for me as myself, as a spiritual guide, a spirit worker. I could call myself a shamanic practitioner. Sometimes I do, but I don't particularly love that term because the language doesn't feel like it's mine. I much prefer the term spirit worker. And though I don't actively call myself a healer, many of my clients have begun to refer to me as that, which I feel just hand over heart, head bowed, very, very grateful and humble for that, or about that. So this episode ultimately is a quiet and clear acknowledgement of this part of me that has been very present, but is not always publicly named. And it's not just in the moments that look spiritual from the outside that this is part of who I am, but it's in the way that I care for myself. And it's in how I move through conflict. It's in how I honor what's sacred and how I choose to show up each day with intention. Here comes a train. Let's pause. Okay, not it literally being a 5-minute train. I'm not even exaggerating. I was talking about showing up each day with intention. And as I've said in the episode already, that this is another facet of what I call an intentional life. And it's not about having it all figured out. That's probably one of the most important pieces for me. This isn't about getting it right or perfect. It's about being in right relationship and being able to have healthy conflict and to be called in, and that this is be in integrity and be in alignment with my values. And that's with myself and with this great mystery and spirit, but also with the people that I serve. And that's what I hope, wish, and intend to help others with. Others walk this path. So if you are on your own self-discovery, self-care journey, which I suspect you are, is the reason you're tuned in and listening right now, know that you are not alone. And I'm here to answer your questions and help you in learning and discerning and exploring to the best of my ability if and or when you feel ready and resonate with me as your guide. Another thing I said earlier in this episode, my life has become the ceremony. All these noises all of a sudden, I'm just going to leave it. We're rolling with it. What is that? Is that helicopter keeps going back and forth. I'm just laughing because this is real. I don't want to edit all of this stuff out. Life is too polished these days, and we need to come back to the real and the raw and the vulnerable and the sticky and the icky and the frustrating, whatever it may be. I was saying my life has become the ceremony, and maybe it resonates for you to think of your life as some sort of ceremony as well. And in your own practice, in your own ways that you find meaning. So closing out this episode, again, thank you for listening. Take what resonates, leave the rest, weave it through in meaningful ways for you. If you want to take a screenshot or share about it on social media, that's a great modern day way of verbal, word of mouth sharing. And the old classic way of just telling a friend works too. If you feel inclined to leave a review, especially if you're listening on Spotify, but any platform, that also means a lot. And I just want to say I appreciate you so much for tuning in and really taking this time to bring in these curiosities to figure out more about yourself, because we need more people learning about themselves and taking care of themselves so that we can, again, show up and be there with and for the people and the beings that we care most about, and for the causes and our communities that are really important for us. Cheers, friend.